The world was ending in fire and noise. Gene crouched behind a shattered wall, the rough concrete digging into his shoulder. The air tasted of burned metal and dust. In the sky, dark ships, shaped like angry insects, spat glowing green bolts down onto the city. Each bolt landed with a thunderous crash, sending more pieces of his home flying into the smoky air. This was Wanine, a colony world that was supposed to be a new beginning. Now it was a grave. The Xylac were burying them alive. Gene was a soldier, but he felt like a child hiding from a storm. His rifle felt heavy and useless in his hands. He had seen the green bolts cut through armored vehicles. He had seen what they did to people. A flash of light, and then nothing but ash. He thought of Sue, his wife. Was she safe in the deep shelters? He had to believe she was. The thought of her was the only thing keeping him from running into the open and screaming. A sharp whistle sounded from his squad leader. It was time to move. They were falling back to the last defensive line, a place called the Old Quarter. Gene pushed himself up, his legs aching, and ran with the others. They moved like ghosts through the broken streets, past burning buildings and the silent, broken forms of those who hadn't been fast enough. The Old Quarter was different from the newer parts of the city. The buildings here were made of Rayal stone, carved by the first settlers. They were tougher, had withstood the initial attacks better. But even here there was damage. The Grand Temple at the center of the square had taken a direct hit. One of its tall, graceful spires had collapsed, scattering stone across the plaza. That Jin's squad was ordered to spread out and look for survivors. It felt like a hopeless task. The silence was heavier here, broken only by the distant booms of the attack and the crackle of fires. Gene moved towards the broken temple. The great wooden door was splintered. He stepped inside, his boots crunching on glass and debris. The air inside was still and cold. Light streamed down through holes in the roof, illuminating floating dust motes like tiny stars. That's when he heard it. A faint, ragged breath. He followed the sound, his rifle raised. It led him to the back of the main hall, behind the altar, which was now just a pile of rubble. Propped against a large statue of one of the first settlers was a man. Jin's breath caught in his throat. It was Old Man Kong. Everyone knew the stories about Kong. He was a legend from the early days of the colony, a hero from a war before the Xylac. He was supposed to be retired, or maybe even dead. But here he was. He was wearing an old suit of armor, not like the modern plastic and ceramic suits Gene and the others wore. This armor was made of polished metal, etched with intricate patterns. It was beautiful, but it was also badly damaged. A large, dark stain spread across his chest plate. Gene rushed over, slinging his rifle onto his back. "Sir, can you hear me?" Kang's eyes were closed. His face was pale and lined with pain and age. He looked ancient, a relic from a different time. Gene fumbled for the medkit on his belt, pulling out a small gel pack designed to seal wounds. As he reached out to apply it, Kang's hand snapped up with surprising speed. His grip was like iron around Jin's wrist. Gene froze, startled by the strength left in the dying man. Kang's eyes opened. They were dark, deep, and full of a pain that wasn't just physical. He looked at Gene, really looked at him. "It is too late for me, boy," Kang whispered. His voice was a dry, rasping sound like stones grinding together. "The gel will not help this. You need help," Gene insisted, trying to pull his hand free to help, but Kang's grip did not loosen. "Listen," Kang rasped, his voice urgent. "They're coming back. The noise, it will draw them. You do not have much time." Gene could hear it too. The whine of a Xylac scout ship getting closer. They were like carrion birds, coming to pick over the remains. Kang used his other hand to press something cold and hard into Jin's palm. It was a cylinder about the length of Jin's forearm. It was made of a dull, gray metal that felt strangely warm. It had no seams, no buttons, no obvious markings. It just hummed with a faint, deep vibration like a sleeping heart. "Take this," Kang said, his voice growing weaker. "This blade, it is our last hope. It is our shame and our salvation." Gene stared at the cylinder. It felt heavy, far heavier than it should for its size. "A blade? What is it?" "A weapon. The only weapon that matters," Kang coughed. and a trickle of blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. When you're cornered, when death is certain, it will activate. It will save you. It will make you unstoppable. It will save you from any death at all. A wild, desperate hope flared in Jin's chest. A weapon that could stop the Xylac? A way to fight back? A way to protect Sue? He could almost see it. A beam of light cutting through the enemy. A shield that could protect his people. This was the miracle they needed, but Kong was not finished. His eyes, which had been fading, suddenly burned with a fierce, final intensity. His grip on Jin's wrist became crushing. "But you must understand the cost," he hissed, pulling Jin closer. His breath was a ghost on Jin's face. "It's power. It has a price. A terrible price." "What cost?" Jin asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What do I have to do?" Kang's gaze was unwavering, filled with a bottomless grief that Jin could not understand. "The cost is not what you do," he said, each word a struggle. "The cost is what you are. The cost is the life you cherish." Jin stared at him, confused. "I don't understand." "The life you cherish," Kong repeated, his voice rising with his last strength. "The person you love most. The one you would die for. The blade, it feeds on that. It takes their light, their spirit, their very life to fuel your power. To save you, it consumes them. Remember, the life you cherish." He let go of Jin's wrist and slumped back against the statue, all his strength gone. The warning hung in the air between them, a poisonous, unthinkable idea. Outside, the whine of the Xylac scout ship became a deafening roar. It was right above the temple. Dust shook loose from the ceiling, raining down on them. Kang's eyes were fixed on the holes in the roof, on the dark shape passing overhead. "It is here," he whispered. Then his eyes found Jin's one last time. "Choose wisely, boy. The victory is never worth the price." A final, long breath escaped his lips. The fierce light in his eyes went out. Old Man Kong was gone. Jin was alone. Alone in the silent temple, with the humming metal cylinder in his hand and a terrible secret in his heart. The life you cherish. Sue, his kind, beautiful Sue, with her laugh that could light up a room, her hands always stained with soil from her plants, her hope for a green future on this broken world. The thought was monstrous. It couldn't be true. It was the ranting of a dying, delirious old man that a shadow fell over the hole in the roof. Jin looked up. A Xylac scout, a sleek black four-legged machine with a single glowing red eye, lowered itself on silent cables, blocking the light. Its eye scanned the room and immediately fixed on him. Jin scrambled back, dropping the cylinder with a clatter on the stone floor. He raised his rifle and fired. The plasma bolts slammed into the scout's armored body, sizzling and sparking, but doing no real damage. The scout took a step forward, its metal claws scraping on the stone. A weapon barrel emerged from its underbelly, glowing with the same sickly green energy that had leveled the city. This was it. This was death. He was cornered. There was no escape. The cylinder on the floor, lying between him and the advancing machine, began to glow with a soft, blue light. A low hum filled the air, drowning out the sound of the scout. Lines of light appeared on its surface, tracing a complex pattern. It was activating that Kang's words echoed in his mind. "It will save you from any death." The Xylac scout took another step, its weapon charging to full power, aiming directly at Jin's head. "The cost is the life you cherish." Jin thought of Sue, safe in the deep shelters. He saw her smile. He saw her tending to her fragile seedlings, fighting to bring life to a world dedicated to death. The cylinder unfolded. It happened in an instant. Sections of the metal slid apart with a smooth, silent motion, and a blade of pure, white energy erupted from it. It was not a solid thing. It was like contained lightning, shimmering and brilliant, casting sharp, clean shadows across the dark temple. It was the most beautiful and terrifying thing Jin had ever seen. The blade floated a few inches above the cylinder, humming with immense power. The Xylac scout fired a green bolt of plasma, shot across the room. Jin didn't even have time to flinch. The energy blade moved on its own. It was a blur. It intercepted the bolt, and instead of exploding, the green energy simply vanished, absorbed into the white light. The blade didn't even waver. The scout, its simple logic unable to process this, took another step and fired again. Again, the blade moved impossibly fast, and the attack disappeared. Then the blade shot forward. It wasn't held by anyone. It was like a living thing. It sliced through the air and passed straight through the Xylax scout's main body. The scout stopped. Its single red eye flickered. Then, with a quiet crack, the machine split neatly into two perfect halves. The pieces fell to the floor with a heavy, dead clang. The red eye went dark. The energy blade retracted, sliding back into the cylinder. The light faded. The hum stopped. It was just a dull metal tube again, lying on the stone floor. The temple was silent once more. Gene sat there, his heart hammering against his ribs, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He was alive. He should be dead, but he was alive. The weapon had saved him. It was real. Everything Kong had said was real. He crawled forward on shaking hands and knees. He stared at the cylinder. He stared at the two halves of the Xylax scout. The cut was so clean, so perfect. Slowly, hesitantly, he reached out and picked up the cylinder. It was warm. He expected it to feel evil, but it didn't. It just felt powerful. And waiting, he stood up, the cylinder held tightly in his hand. He looked back at the body of Old Man Kong. The old warrior's face was now peaceful, the pain gone. Gene thought about the warning. The cost is the life you cherish. He thought of Sue. He had just felt her life, her spirit, in this temple. It had given him the strength to go on. Could this thing really take that from her? It was impossible. It had to be a metaphor, a test of his resolve. Perhaps the sound of more Xylax ships in the distance decided for him. He had a weapon. He had a way to fight back. He could save his people. He could save Sue from this invasion. That was what mattered. He would use the blade to protect the life he cherished. That made sense. That was the right thing to do. He tucked the cylinder securely into his belt. He picked up his rifle and ran out of the temple, back into the burning city, back towards the war. He had a new mission. He had hope. And buried deep, deep down, a tiny, cold seed of fear had been planted. A fear that the dying warrior's words were not a metaphor at all. The hope that the blade gave Gene was a fierce, burning thing. It pushed him through the ruined streets, his exhaustion forgotten. He clutched the cylinder in his hand, its solid weight a promise. He didn't think about Kang's warning. He pushed those words into a dark corner of his mind and locked them away. All that mattered was getting back to the command post, telling them what he had, and turning the tide. When he finally stumbled into the makeshift base, set up in the underground transit tunnels, the soldiers there stared at him with hollow eyes. They had seen him leave with his squad. They had heard the reports from the old quarter. They thought he was a ghost. Gene, is that you? His friend, Min, rushed over, his face smudged with dirt. We heard. We thought you were all gone. The temple collapsed. Another soldier said, his voice flat. It didn't, Gene said, his own voice sounding strange and loud. I found something. I found a way to fight. He was taken to Commander Park, a grim-faced woman with a map of the dying city spread out before her. She listened, her expression not changing, as Gene told her about Old Man Kong and the weapon. When he held up the cylinder, her eyes narrowed with skepticism. A magic sword? She said, her tone weary. Gene, we're losing this war with plasma rifles and artillery. We don't need fairy tales. It's not a fairy tale. Gene insisted, his desperation making him sound angry. I saw it. It cut a Xylax scout in half, like it was nothing. Just then, the alarms blared. A harsh, electronic scream filled the tunnels. Reports started crackling over the comms. A Xylax push was coming. A big one. They were breaking through the western barricade. If that fell, the enemy would pour into the tunnels and overrun the command post. It would be the end. Commander Park looked from the frantic reports on her screen to Jin's desperate, determined face. She had no reinforcements to send. It was a hopeless situation. Fine, she said, her voice tight. Go. Show me your fairy tale. If you can hold that line for even 10 minutes, you will have given us a miracle. That was all Gene needed. He turned and ran, not towards the safety of the deeper tunnels, but towards the sound of the fighting. Men and a few others followed him, their rifles ready, their faces full of doubt and a tiny spark of hope. The western barricade was chaos. It was a wall of rubble and burned-out vehicles, and it was crumbling. Green plasma bolts rained down from the Xylac warriors advancing through the streets. They were tall, chitinous creatures, their movements sharp and clicking. Human soldiers fired back from behind cover, but their weapons were barely slowing the enemy down. Gene found a spot behind a crushed transport truck. He could see the line was about to break. He took a deep breath. He thought of Sue, safe in the deep shelters. He was doing this for her, to make a world where she could come back to the surface. That he pressed the small, almost invisible indentation on the cylinder that he had discovered on his run here. The IT unfolded in his hand, the same silent, beautiful, and terrifying process. The blade of pure white energy erupted, humming with immense power. It cast a sharp, clean light on the dirty, smoke-filled battlefield. The soldiers near him stared, their jaws slack. "What is that?" one of them whispered. The Xylax saw it too. One of them raised its weapon and fired a searing green bolt directly at Gene. Gene didn't even have to move. The blade moved for him. It was like an extension of his will, but faster, more precise than he could ever be. It swept through the air, and the plasma bolt vanished, absorbed into its light. Then, the blade pointed itself at the Xylac warrior. It felt like a current pulling him. Gene ran forward, not with the clumsy fear of a soldier, but with the grace of a dancer. He leaped over the barricade. The Xylac fired again and again. The blade was a blur of white light, deflecting every shot, sometimes sending them back into the enemy ranks that he reached the first warrior. The energy blade sliced through its hard outer shell as if it were paper. The creature didn't even have time to make a sound before it fell into two pieces. Gene moved to the next one and the next. He was not fighting. He was harvesting. The blade knew every move, predicted every attack. It was unstoppable. He was unstoppable. The human soldiers, seeing this, found their courage. A roar went up from the barricade. They started firing with renewed fury, picking off the Xylac that were trying to flank the glowing warrior in their midst. Men watched, his rifle forgotten in his hands. He saw Gene move through the enemy like a force of nature. It was the most incredible thing he had ever seen. It was a miracle that, in 10 minutes, it was over. The Xylac assault was broken. Dozens of their warriors lay dead, cleanly dissected. The rest had retreated. The western barricade was secure. Gene stood panting in the middle of the street, surrounded by the fallen enemy. The blade retracted back into its cylinder. The sudden silence was deafening. He looked down at the metal tube in his hand. It was warm, almost hot. He felt a strange emptiness, a hollow feeling in his chest, as if he had run a great distance without breathing. Then the cheers started. Soldiers rushed towards him, clapping him on the back, shouting his name. "Gene! Gene, the unbreakable!" Commander Park arrived, her skepticism replaced by stunned awe. How did you do that?" Gene just shook his head, unable to explain. He felt dizzy. The hollow feeling was growing. He needed to see Sue. He needed to know she was okay. "I have to go," he said to the commander. "I have to check on my wife." Park nodded, her eyes full of a new respect. "Of course. Go. You have earned it. Rest. We will need you again soon." The journey to the deep shelters felt long. The euphoria of the fight faded, replaced by a deep weariness and that persistent, cold worry. He kept telling himself he was being foolish. Kang's words were the ramblings of a dying man. Sue was safe underground. The blade was a tool, a weapon. Nothing more. He reached the shelter entrance, a massive reinforced door set into a mountainside. The guards, who knew him, let him through with respectful nods. The news of his victory had already spread. Inside, the shelters were crowded and loud. Thousands of people were packed into the cavernous space, their faces drawn with fear and exhaustion. The air smelled of unwashed bodies and disinfectant. He pushed through the crowds, heading for the section where the agricultural teams were billeted. Sue would be there with her plants, trying to create a little piece of life in this tomb. He found her in a corner, under the dim glow of grow lights. She was tending to trays of seedlings, her back to him. His heart swelled with relief. She was here. She was safe. "Sue," he said. She turned, and his smile froze on his face. Sue was pale. Her skin, usually sun-kissed from her work in the biodomes, had a grayish tint. There were dark shadows under her eyes, which seemed to have lost some of their bright, intelligent spark. She looked exhausted, drained. "Jean," she said, and her voice was weak, thinned out. She tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She moved towards him, and her step was slow, unsteady. He caught her in his arms, holding her tightly. She felt thinner, more fragile. "Sue, are you sick? What's wrong?" She shook her head, resting it against his chest. "I'm just so tired, my love. It's this place, the bad air, the worry." She looked up at him, her hand gently touching his face. "I heard what you did. They are saying you are a hero. I was so scared for you." "I'm fine," he said, holding her closer. "Look at me. I'm not hurt." It was true. He didn't have a single scratch on him. "I know," she whispered, "but I feel like I fought the battle for you." She gave a small, weak laugh, as if it were a joke. Jin's blood ran cold. He felt the weight of the cylinder in his pocket. It seemed to burn through the fabric against his leg. "It's just stress," Sue said, pulling away and looking at her seedlings. "I'll be better after I sleep. I just need to finish watering these." She picked up a small watering can, and her hand trembled slightly. She had to use both hands to steady it. Jean watched her, the cold fear in his stomach coiling tighter. He helped her with the plants, his mind racing. It was a coincidence. It had to be. The stress of the invasion, the poor conditions in the shelter, the fear for his safety. That was all it was. He was imagining a connection because of the ramblings of a dead man. He took her back to the small sleeping area they shared, a cot separated from others by a thin curtain. He made her lie down. She was asleep almost instantly, her breathing shallow. He sat on the edge of the cot, watching her. He took the cylinder from his pocket and stared at it. It was just a piece of metal. It was cool to the touch, now that he looked from the inert metal to his sleeping wife. He saw the fatigue etched in her face, the unnatural pallor of her skin. "The cost is the life you cherish." And oh, he refused to believe it. The blade was a gift. It was their salvation. He was using it to protect her, to protect everyone. He was saving the life he cherished. That was the truth. He would believe that. He had a dot. He tucked the cylinder back into his pocket and lay down next to Sue, holding her close. He would be more careful. He would only use the blade when it was absolutely necessary. Everything would be fine. He repeated this to himself until he fell into a troubled sleep, where his dreams were full of white light and a voice rasping a warning he was trying desperately to forget. The days blurred into a grim routine. The Xylac attacks did not stop. They came in waves, each one stronger than the last. And each time the line was about to break, the call would go out. They needed the unbreakable. They needed the blade. Jean would answer the call. He told himself he had no choice. He would take the cylinder from its hiding place in his gear, and his stomach would twist into a hard knot. He would look at Sue, who spent more and more time sleeping on their cot, and he would tell himself it was for her. He was building a safe world for her. The battles were always the same. A flash of white light, the hum of immense power, and then he would become something more than human. The blade was a dance partner that knew every step. It moved with a mind of its own, a beautiful, deadly extension of his will. He cut through Xylac warriors. He deflected plasma cannon fire. He stood firm against charges that would have vaporized a tank, that he never got a scratch. He was Jean, the unbreakable. The soldiers cheered for him. Commander Park looked at him not just with respect, but with a kind of awe and a little fear. He was their savior. But after every fight, that hollow, empty feeling inside him grew deeper. And the journey back to the shelters felt longer and heavier each time. He would always go straight to Sue. And every time, she was a little worse. That tea was no longer something he could explain away. It was a slow, steady decline, a terrible mirror of his own rising fame on the battlefield. Her vibrant energy was gone. The woman who used to run through the biodomes, her hands full of seeds and her laugh echoing under the glass ceilings, was now a ghost. She moved slowly, carefully, as if every step cost her great effort. Her work with the seedlings became a struggle. He often found her just sitting, staring at the green shoots, as if she didn't have the strength to lift the watering can. Her hair, once thick and shiny, became thin and dull. It came out in clumps on her brush. She started losing weight. Her clothes, which used to fit her well, now hung loosely on her frame. "Jean," she said to him one evening, her voice a dry whisper. They were sitting on their cot. She was leaning against him for support. "I feel so strange. It's like my battery is running out. The doctors say there is nothing wrong with me. They say it is my heart, but it tests strong. They don't understand." Jean held his throat tight. He felt the hard shape of the cylinder in his pocket. He had started carrying it with him always. "It's the stress, Sue. The bad air down here. It will be better soon. We are pushing them back." She looked up at him, and her eyes, which had once been so full of light and intelligence, were now cloudy and tired. "Is it you?" she asked softly. "When you're out there, fighting, I feel so cold and so afraid. Not for you, but for me. It's a selfish feeling. I'm sorry." Her words were like a knife in his heart. He shook his head, holding her tighter. "No, no, it's not me. It's not." But he could not meet her eyes. The worst day came during the battle for the Northern Ridge. It was the most important fight yet. The ridge overlooked the main power generator for the entire colony. If the Xylac took it, the shelters would go dark. Life support would fail. Everyone would die. The fighting was fiercer than anything Jean had ever seen. The Xylac seemed endless. He fought for hours. The white blade was a constant blur, a whirlwind of destruction holding back the tide of black chitin and green plasma. He felt powerful, invincible. He felt the cheers of the soldiers like a physical force pushing him forward. In the middle of the battle, as he sliced through a towering Xylac beast, a sudden, sharp pain lanced through his own chest. It wasn't a physical wound. It was a feeling of terrible, profound loss. A feeling of something precious snapping. For a single second, the energy blade flickered. He shook it off, thinking it was just exhaustion. He fought on until the last Xylac was destroyed and the ridge was secure. The victory was total. The soldiers lifted him onto their shoulders, chanting his name. Unbreakable, unbreakable. But Jean felt sick. The hollow feeling was now a vast, cold cavern inside him. He had to get to the shelters. He had to see Sud. He didn't wait for orders or congratulations. He ran. He pushed past the celebrating soldiers, his heart pounding with a fear that was worse than any he had felt on the battlefield. When he burst into the shelter area, he knew. The air felt different. There was a tension. People turned to look at him, and their faces were not happy. They were sad. They were pitying him. He ran to their sleeping area. The thin curtain was drawn. A doctor was standing there. Along with Min, Min's face was pale, his eyes red. "Jean," Min said, his voice cracking. Jean shoved past him and pulled the curtain aside. Sue was lying on the cot. She was so still. Her skin was almost transparent. An oxygen mask was over her face, and a monitor beside the cot beeped with a slow, weak rhythm. She was unconscious. What happened? Jin's voice was a raw scrape. The doctor, a tired-looking man, shook his head. She collapsed in the greenhouse. We can't find a cause. Her vitals are fading. It's like her body is just shutting down. There's no medical reason for it. I'm sorry. Jean fell to his knees beside the cot. He took Sue's hand. It was cold. Her fingers were limp in his. He could feel the fragile bones under her skin. He remembered the moment in the battle. The sharp pain. The feeling of something breaking. The flicker of the blade. It was all true. Every word. He had been standing on a ridge, drenched in the glory of his victory, while his wife was lying here, dying. The energy that made him a god on the battlefield was her energy. The life that made him unbreakable was her life. He started to cry. Silent, helpless sobs shook his body. He pressed his forehead against her cold hand. I'm sorry, he whispered over and over again. I'm so sorry, Sue. I didn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. He saw it all now with terrible clarity. The timing was perfect. Her slow decline matched his frequent use of the blade. Her collapse happened at the exact moment of his greatest, most prolonged fight. He had felt the connection break. The life he cherished was not a metaphor. It was not a test of his resolve. It was a direct, cruel transaction. Her breath for his strength. Her vitality for his victory. He had saved the power generator. He had saved the shelters. He had saved thousands of lives. And the cost was lying on this cot, barely clinging to her own, that he looked at her peaceful, sleeping face. He saw the faint, slow rise and fall of her chest under the blanket. He thought of her laugh. He thought of her hope for a green future. He thought of the way she used to look at him with so much love and light. That light was almost gone, and he had stolen it. That he still had the cylinder in his pocket. He could feel its weight. It felt evil now. It felt like a parasite, a thing that promised salvation but delivered only a slow, terrible death to the innocent. The cheers of the soldiers echoed in his memory. Unbreakable. But he was breaking now. He was shattering into 1,000 pieces, right there on the cold floor of the shelter that he had a choice to make. He knew that. The war was not over. The Xylac were still out there. Commander Park would call for him again. The people needed their unbreakable hero, but if he ever picked up that blade again, if he ever let its white light flare to life, he knew what would happen. The monitor beside Sue's bed would flatline. The last bit of life in the woman he loved would be extinguished. Used as fuel for his power, he held her cold hand tightly, as if he could push his own life back into her. He made a promise to her then, a silent promise that he whispered into the quiet, beeping stillness of the room. Never again, he whispered. I will never use it again. It was a promise he did not know if he could keep. The world outside the medical bay continued its slow collapse, but for Gene, time stopped. He lived in a small chair next to Sue's cot. He watched the slow, steady beep of the heart monitor. He held her hand, tried to warm it with his own. He talked to her, telling her stories about the early days on Wanine, about the first time they met, about the silly little plant she had named after him. He hoped somehow she could hear him. The doctor came and went, his expression growing grimmer each time. There was no change. Sue was suspended between life and death, and Jean knew, with a cold certainty, what was keeping her there. It was his inaction, his refusal to pick up the blade. After 3 days, Commander Park found him. She stood at the foot of the cot, her uniform crisp, a stark contrast to the messy, sorrowful scene. Jean, she said, her voice low but firm. We need to talk. He didn't look up from Sue's face. I'm not leaving her. I'm not asking you to leave her, Park said. I'm asking you to save her. To save all of them. She gestured around the crowded shelter, at the hundreds of fearful faces watching them. The Xylac are massing for their final assault. Their main hive spire is active. They're going to throw everything they have at us. If they break our lines, they will dig us out of these tunnels. Everyone in this shelter will die. Jean finally looked at her. His eyes were red and empty. You don't understand what you're asking. I understand that you have a weapon that can turn the tide. Park's voice rose, edged with desperation. I understand that you are our only hope. Without you, we will lose. Sue will die. Everyone will die. If I fight, she dies for sure. Jin's voice was a raw shout that echoed in the quiet space. He stood up, his body trembling with anger and grief. He pointed a shaking finger at the cylinder, which now sat on a small table like a cursed object. That thing, it doesn't run on batteries. It runs on her life. Every time I use it, it takes a piece of her. The last time I used it, it almost killed her. Don't you see? To be your hero, I have to be her murderer. Commander Park stared at him, her face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. She looked from Jin's tormented face to the lifeless form of Sue, then back to the simple metal cylinder. The legend of the Unbreakable had spread, but no one knew this part of the story. That can't be, she whispered. It is, Jean said, his anger draining away, leaving only a bottomless exhaustion. The dying warrior told me. The cost is the life you cherish. I didn't want to believe him, but it's true. Every word. The silence between them was heavy. The beeping of the monitor seemed louder than ever. "So what is your choice, then?" Park asked, her voice quiet now. "Let everyone die, including her, because you'll not fight? Or fight and save thousands at the cost of the one you love?" It was the question that had been tearing him apart. There was no good answer. There is only a choice between two kinds of hell. "I can't," he whispered, sinking back into his chair. "I can't be the one who ends her life. I would rather die with her as a man than live as a hero who killed his wife." Commander Park looked at him for a long time. She saw not a legendary warrior, but a broken young man facing an impossible decision. She gave a slow, grim nod. "Then we will fight without you," she said, "and we will die without you. I hope your conscience is clear." She turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous shelter. The call to arms came a few hours later. The final Xylac assault had begun. Soldiers rushed to their positions. The sounds of distant battle, the deep thump of explosions, filtered down into the shelters. The air shook with the violence above. Jean sat and held Sue's hand. He tried to block out the noise. He tried to pretend it wasn't happening. He focused on the beep of the monitor. It was slower now, he was sure of it. Or was he imagining it? His friend Min ran up to him, his helmet on, his rifle in his hand. "Jean, they're breaking through the eastern sector. We can't hold them. Please, we need you." Jean didn't look up. "I can't, Min. Jean, listen to me." Min pleaded, grabbing his shoulder. "If they get in here, it's over. They'll kill everyone. They'll kill Sue right in this bed. Is that what you want?" The words were like a physical blow. Jean flinched. He looked at Sue's peaceful face. Would a Xylac warrior show her mercy? No. Her death would be swift and brutal and meaningless. At least if he used the blade, her death would mean something. It would save people. The conflict tore him in two. His love for her demanded he stay, that he protect her by doing nothing. But his love for her also demanded he protect her from the enemy, even if it meant using the very thing that was killing her. He was crying again, hot, helpless tears. He leaned close to Sue, his lips near her ear. "I don't know what to do," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Please, Sue, tell me what to do." As if in answer, her eyelids fluttered, his breath caught in his throat. Her eyes opened just a slit. They were cloudy, unfocused, but they were looking at him. She saw him. She was in there. Her lips moved behind the oxygen mask. No sound came out, but he could read the word on her lips that IT was his name. Jean. Then, with a strength that seemed to come from the very last of her spirit, her hand tightened around his. It was a weak squeeze, but it was deliberate. It was a message. Her eyes, for a single, brilliant moment, cleared. They were filled with love and with an immense, heartbreaking sadness, and with understanding. She looked at him. Then her gaze drifted towards the table where the cylinder lay. She looked back at him. In that look, he saw everything. She knew. Somehow, she knew what the blade was doing to her. She knew the price. And in her eyes, he saw not anger, not fear, but a quiet, terrible acceptance. Her lips moved again, forming two silent words. "Stop them." Then the light in her eyes faded. Her hand went limp in his. Her head lolled to the side. She was unconscious again, her brief moment of clarity gone. But her message was seared into his soul. Stop them. She wasn't telling him to save her. She was telling him to save their home. She was making the choice for him. She was offering what was left of her life, not for his power, but for the people in the shelter, for the future she had always believed in. The sound of the battle grew louder. A panic was starting to spread through the shelter. People were screaming. Jean looked at Sue's face, now peaceful and empty once more. He looked at the cylinder. The war inside him was over. Her words had ended it. He stood up. His body felt heavy, like it was made of stone. He walked to the table and picked up the cylinder. It felt cold and dead in his hand. He did not look back at Sue. He could not. If he looked back, he would never be able to leave. He walked past Min, his face a mask of grim resolve. "Jean," Min said, hope and fear in his voice. "Stay with her," Jean said, his voice flat and empty. "Don't let anyone near her." Then he ran. He ran through the crowded, panicked shelter towards the entrance, towards the sound of the war. He held the cylinder tightly in his fist. He was not running to become a hero. He was not running to be the unbreakable. He was running to his wife's execution. And he was the one who would swing the axe. The surface was a vision of hell. The sky was black with smoke, lit from below by the orange glow of countless fires. The air shook with the roar of Xylac energy weapons and the answering crack of human artillery. Jean ran through the chaos, the cylinder a lead weight in his hand. He did not feel like a soldier. He felt like a man walking to the gallows that he found the battle at the main gate. It was a slaughter. The human line had broken. Soldiers were falling back, firing wildly as they retreated. Xylac warriors, their chitinous bodies clicking and hissing, poured through the breach. They were methodical, merciless, cutting down anyone in their path. They were heading straight for the shelter entrance. Commander Park was there, firing a heavy plasma rifle from behind a barricade. She saw Jean, and her eyes widened with a desperate hope. "Jean, here, now." Jean stopped running. He stood in the middle of the road, between the advancing Xylac and the retreating humans. This was it, the final stand. He looked at the cylinder. He thought of Sue, lying on her cot, the last bit of her life flickering like a candle in the wind. He thought of her final words. Stop them. He pressed the activation switch. Nothing happened, but a cold terror seized him. He pressed it again, frantically. The cylinder remained a dead, cold piece of metal in his hand. The white blade did not appear. The hum of power was silent, that it was too late. He had waited too long. Sue was too far gone. There was not enough life left in her to power the weapon that a Xylac warrior saw him standing there. It raised its weapon, the green glow lighting its insect-like face. It fired. Jean did not move. He accepted it. This was his death. It was better this way. He would die a man, with Sue's name on his lips. He closed his eyes, but the shot never came. He heard a sizzling crackle and opened his eyes. The plasma bolt hung in the air a few feet in front of him, frozen. A sphere of soft, golden light had appeared around him, and the bolt was dissolving into harmless sparks against it. The cylinder in his hand was warm. It was not the fierce, white heat of the energy blade. This was a different warmth. A gentle, deep, and sorrowful heat. It was not unfolding into a blade. Instead, the golden light was spreading from the cylinder, flowing up his arm, and covering his entire body. It did not feel like power. It felt like a goodbye to in his mind, he saw Sue. Not as she was now, pale and dying, but as she had been. He saw her laughing in the sunlight, her hands covered in soil. He saw her smile across the table. He saw the determined look in her eyes when she talked about making Wanine green again. He felt her love for him, not as a memory, but as a real, tangible presence wrapping around him. The light was not coming from the weapon. It was coming from her. She was giving him everything that was left, not for violence, but for protection, not for killing, but for saving. The Xylac warrior fired again. Again, the bolt dissolved against the golden light. More warriors joined in, concentrating their fire on him. The golden sphere held firm, glowing brighter with each impact. Jean understood now. He had been wrong. The blade was a lie. It was a perversion of this weapon's true nature. The dying warrior had been wrong, or he had never understood. The cost was not the life you cherish. The power was the life you cherish. Its true purpose was not to destroy, but to preserve. And it only worked when the sacrifice was pure, when it was given, not taken. That he had finally made the choice to cherish her life more than his own victory. And in doing so, he had unlocked its real power. The golden light began to pulse. It was slow and deep like a heartbeat. With each pulse it expanded. It flowed out from Jean across the battlefield. It touched the retreating human soldiers. It washed over the Xylac warriors, where it touched the humans. A feeling of calm and awe settled over them. Their fear vanished. They lowered their weapons, watching the light in wonder. Where it touched the Xylac, something else happened. The creatures stopped moving. Their clicking and hissing ceased. The aggressive, hungry light in their eyes went out. The golden light did not cut them or burn them. It simply unmade them. The Xylac warriors, from the smallest scout to the largest beast, began to crumble. They dissolved into clouds of fine, black dust, which the light then gently erased into nothing. It was silent. There were no explosions, no screams of pain. There was only the soft, pulsing light and the quiet disappearance of the enemy. Gene stood at the center of it all. He was not fighting. He was just standing, holding the cylinder, feeling Seuss' love radiate outwards and cleanse the world. He was a conduit for her final, selfless gift. The light spread further beyond the battlefield, towards the distant Xylac hive spire. The great, dark structure, which had been the source of so much fear and death, was touched by the golden wave. It did not explode. It too began to dissolve, its malevolent form breaking apart into harmless particles that were scattered on the wind. In less than a minute, it was over. The golden light faded. The cylinder in Jin's hand was now cold and dark. It was just a piece of metal. The curse was broken. The war was over. The silence was absolute. Then a single cheer broke it, then another, and another, until the air was filled with the joyous, disbelieving cries of the surviving soldiers. They rushed towards Gene, their savior, but Gene was already moving. He turned his back on the celebration and ran. He ran past the cheering soldiers, past Commander Park, who stared at him with utter bewilderment. He did not stop to explain. He had only one thought in his mind. He burst back into the shelter, pushing through the crowds who were now starting to hear the news of the miracle. He ran to the medical bay and shoved the curtain aside. Sue was still lying on the cot. The oxygen mask was on her face. The heart monitor was still beeping. It was beeping. It was beeping stronger than before. The rhythm was no longer slow and weak. It was steady. It was firm. He rushed to her side and grabbed her hand. It was warm. Her skin had lost its terrible gray color. A faint, healthy pink was returning to her cheeks. Her eyelids fluttered open. She looked at him, and her eyes were clear. They were tired, but they were alive. They were her eyes. "Gene?" she whispered, her voice hoarse but audible. "What happened?" "I had the strangest dream. I dreamed I was a light, and you were holding me." Gene let out a sob that was half cry, half laugh. He collapsed onto the chair, burying his face in the sheets beside her, holding her hand tightly. He couldn't speak. The relief was too overwhelming. The doctor came in, his face shocked. He checked the monitors, then checked Sue again. "I don't understand," he stammered. "Her vitals, they're stabilizing. It's a miracle." Gene looked up at Sue, tears streaming down his face. "It was you," he whispered. "You saved us. All of us." She smiled, a weak but real smile. She didn't understand, but she saw the truth in his eyes. She saw the love and the relief. She squeezed his hand. Outside, the people of Wanine were celebrating their sudden, unexplainable deliverance. They talked about Gene, the unbreakable, and the golden light that had destroyed their enemy. But Gene didn't care about any of that. He sat by his wife's side as she slowly, surely, came back to him. The weapon was gone, its purpose fulfilled. The price had been paid, but not in the way the dying warrior had said. The cost had been his willingness to give it all up. The reward was the life he cherished. Returned to him, he had learned the real lesson. The blade would not save you. Only love could do that. And as he watched Sue sleep, her breathing deep and even, he knew that was the only victory that mattered.